Okay. Good evening, and welcome to the EIR Scoping Meeting for the Culver City General Plan Update Environmental Review. I'm Saul Blumenfeld, Community Development Director for the City of Culver City. We have Jacqueline De La Rocha and Alan Sacco from our Environmental Consultants ESA, and we have Eric Yurkovich from Ramey and Associates. And Ramey is our lead project consultants. We also have Lauren Wren, who is with our city planning staff. And we're glad you're all here. And we're going to give you a brief presentation of the environmental review process and the issues that we've identified for further study in the EIR. And then we'll open up the meeting for questions and comments on the issues that we'll be addressing in the environmental impact report. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jacqueline and we'll get started.
Thank you, Saul. As Saul mentioned, my name is Jacqueline De La Rocha and I'm a project manager with ESA, the environmental consulting firm helping the city with preparation of the General Plan 2045 program EIR. The City of Culver City, as lead agency under CEQA, is holding this EIR scoping meeting to comply with the requirements of CEQA. The picture Culver City General Plan 2045, which we will refer to during this presentation as General Plan 2045, is a citywide project. There have been numerous meetings on the General Plan 2045. This particular meeting is the beginning of the CEQA process for the preparation of the program EIR that will evaluate the environmental impacts of implementation of the General Plan 2045. The objectives of tonight's scoping meeting are to provide brief information about the project and the EIR process, to identify the environmental topics to be analyzed in the EIR, and to solicit input on specific environmental issues and concerns the community would like to see addressed in the EIR. As we will discuss later on, the scoping meeting is for community input only on what they would like to see addressed in the EIR, as the city is at the beginning of its environmental review process. After a brief presentation on the project, we will open the scoping meeting to the public to provide verbal comments. As mentioned earlier, General Plan 2045 is a citywide project for the city of Culver City. The city is located in Los Angeles County and covers about 5 square miles. The city of Culver City is bounded by the city of Los Angeles to the northwest and south, and unincorporated county areas to the east. Primary regional access is provided by Interstate 10, Interstate 405, and State Route 90. As illustrated in this figure, the planning area for General Plan 2045 includes the Culver City's jurisdictional boundaries as well as its sphere of influence. The majority of the planning area is urbanized and developed with residential uses. The non-urbanized areas of the planning area primarily consist of areas in the eastern portion of Culver City and within the sphere of influence. Biono Creek, which makes up 2.3% of the planning area, runs through the central portion of the planning area, continuing to the Pacific Ocean. The table on the slide provides the acreage and percentage of land coverage for each general plan land use category within the planning area. General Plan 2045 will consist of the following 14 elements, including land use and community design, mobility, housing, noise, conservation and open space, safety, equity, community health and environmental justice, governance and leadership, arts and culture, reimagining public safety, economic development, parks, recreation and public facilities, climate change and sustainability, and infrastructure. Overall, the General Plan 2045 will allow more residential density and a greater mix of uses. Specifically, build-out forecasts between 2019 and 2045 show an increase of 12,450 residential uses, an increase of 2,126,900 square feet of commercial uses, an increase of 256,400 square feet of industrial uses, and no increase in institutional uses. The table on this slide provides the general growth projections for population, housing, and jobs under the General Plan 2045. the net change as it compares to the existing population, households, and jobs in the city, and a comparison to the Culver City 1996 general plan growth projections. Now we will discuss the California Environmental Quality Act, known as CEQA. The purpose of CEQA is to inform the decision makers and the public of a project's potential environmental effects. It also increases the public's understanding of and participation in the environmental review process, as well as discloses the potential impacts of a project on the environment and identifies ways to avoid or reduce significant environmental impacts through mitigation measures or alternatives to a project. Program EIRs can be used as the basic general environmental assessment from an overall program of future projects, policies, and related implementation actions, such as the General Plan 2045. A program EIR has several advantages. First, it allows lead agency to look at the broad citywide impacts of the proposed general plan before its adoption. Second, it provides a basic reference document to avoid unnecessary repetition of facts or analysis in subsequent project-specific assessments. As a programmatic document, this EIR for the General Plan 2045 will provide a citywide assessment of the potential impacts of the general plan. This slide presents an overview of the EIR process that is required by CEQA for the city. As you can see, there will be various opportunities for public input throughout the EIR process. We are at the beginning of the EIR process, which began with the city distributing the notice of preparation, also called an NOP, indicating their intent to prepare an EIR. The distribution of the NOP initiated the 30-day scoping period to solicit comments on the content of the EIR. The NOP circulation period began on March 3rd, 2022, and comments on the content of the EIR will be accepted by the city through April 4th, 2022. The scoping meeting is part of that public review process. The intent of the scoping period is to solicit comments from agencies, stakeholders, and the public regarding environmental issues they would like to see addressed in the EIR. All comments received during the comment period will be reviewed by the city and considered as the EIR is prepared. After the scoping period, the technical analyses for this EIR will be carried out. I will talk about the specific topics that will be analyzed in the EIR in the next slides. Following completion of the draft EIR, a notice of availability for a draft EIR will be sent out, and the document will be circulated for public review and comment. At the close of that period, the city will review all comments received and, as required by CEQA, will provide responses to environmental comments raised pertaining to the information in the draft EIR. The city will then prepare a final EIR that will include the draft EIR, responses to comments on the draft EIR, as well as any needed corrections or additions to the draft EIR. Upon publication of the final EIR, public hearings will commence, which will be another opportunity for public input. The city decision makers will then consider the information provided in the EIR and whether to certify the EIR prior to determining whether or not to approve the project. After the city makes their formal approval during the hearings, should they do so, they would then issue a notice of determination, or NOD, indicating their decision. This is a list of the environmental topics anticipated to be addressed and analyzed within the draft EIR, based on an initial study completed by the city that is currently available on the city's website. For each of the topics listed on this slide to be addressed in the EIR, construction-related impacts, long-term operational impacts, and cumulative impacts will be evaluated. Where significant impacts are identified, mitigation measures will be provided to the extent feasible to reduce impacts to less than significant levels. The EIR will also evaluate alternatives to the project to explore opportunities to reduce or avoid significant impacts. The city will conduct technical analyses for certain issues in support of the EIR, including air quality, noise, and transportation. The city will also provide qualitative analyses for topics such as geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, and land use. So through this scoping period, we would like to understand any comments related to these particular areas to ensure the program EIR is prepared for the General Plan 2045 considers all applicable information. As part of the transportation analysis for the program EIR, we wanted to note that CEQA requires an analysis regarding adherence to city's adopted programs, plans, ordinances, and policies, a vehicle miles traveled or VMT analysis, an analysis of potential effects on street hazards, and an analysis of impacts to emergency access. As indicated in the notice of preparation, the close of the comment period is on April 4th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. Please provide your written comments to the city at the physical mailing address provided on this slide or via email to Advance.Planning@culvercity.org. We do encourage you to provide written comments to the city before the close of the comment period. As previously noted, there will be more opportunities for public comments once the draft EIR is completed and circulated, and at the project approval hearing stage of the process. If you would like more information on the General Plan 2045, please visit www.pictureculvercity.com. Or if you wish to review the initial study prepared for the General Plan 2045, it is available at www.pictureculvercity.com/CEQA. Verbal comments on the scope and content of the EIR can now be provided at this time during this EIR scoping meeting. Note, as stated earlier, written comments can also be provided to the city at the city's physical mailing address or via email to the city at Advance.Planning@culvercity.org. If you would like to provide oral comments now, you may do so by clicking the raise hand button in the Zoom application or by dialing *9 if you have joined this meeting by phone. Wait until the moderator calls your name and unmutes you to provide your comments. To make sure we give everyone an opportunity to speak, each person will have 3 minutes to provide their comments. With that, the meeting will now be open for public comments.
Jacqueline, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a hand raised. Patricia has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know if Stephen was going to do this for me or not. Sorry. Oh gosh, maybe I should just move this. Here we are. Patricia, I think you can speak now.
Unmute. Yeah. Good evening. Happy to see the general plan crew again. Slightly different. Nice. I have a question suggestion. I think the EIR moment is a good moment to see the interdependency of the different elements in the general plan. If you mentioned that there is a high chance that we will have more vehicle miles traveled, and we would not take into account that we make a better active transportation plan, then that might be the outcome. But if we combine it with all the other goals that we have, it will look different. So how in this process are you going to combine the different policies? And then my suggestion is that I also see there are so many opportunities to combine. And now I give an example. For example, if you go build in a higher density in the Blackwelder area, and that is also the flood once in a 100-year flood area where you would like to gather water and not add a more impermeable surface. Then if you would see that development together with the development of more housing, together with development of capturing floodwater and stormwater, then you could mitigate a lot of things. These kind of opportunities, are they part of the EIR? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I think we can speak to several different points of your question. I don't know if Eric, you want to start, and then maybe we can go to Alan.
Yeah, it's great to hear your voice, Patricia, again. Yes, the answer to your question is yes. We always work to combine the different elements of the plan and look at their independencies. And so, for example, we'll take the land use plan and its underlying policies related to housing and job distribution around the city, and we'll work with the mobility team, and we've been working with the mobility team on crafting a network that matches that land use pattern. And that network is bikes, peds, transit, as well as cars. And then we take all that information and we package it up and we work with the transportation modeling team, which does the VMT analysis, the vehicle miles traveled analysis, and all of their other transportation analysis to look at the results of that analysis. So for each of those components of the plan, we kind of bring them together and then work with the environmental teams to kind of look at the potential impacts of those. And that's just one example of those interactions and interdependencies that you're kind of referring to and how they come together in the environmental analysis. I don't know if others want to talk more specifically about it as well.
Sure, I can speak just a little bit more to what Eric was saying. My name is Alan Stocco, and I'm with ESA's Air Quality and Greenhouse Gas and Noise Group. So we work very closely with our transportation experts, and as Eric was mentioning, they will generate a lot of that data about VMT, including the impact of or the effects of transportation policies that might help to reduce VMT. And we'll use that information to then incorporate into our air quality analysis because, as you probably know, air quality has a lot to do with vehicle miles traveled. Similarly, with greenhouse gas emissions and even traffic noise. Traffic noise has to do with vehicle trips, but as you reduce or if you have opportunities to reduce vehicle trips, you can have a potentially a positive impact on reducing traffic noise. So we'll work hand in hand with our consultant to make sure that we're incorporating that type of data, and we can then make sure that we're using that, again, cross-disciplinary topics with noise, greenhouse gas, and air quality.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Alan. Anyone else like to speak? Kendall, Asuncion.
I'm filling in for Kendall. My name's James Apfel from Bloom Energy, same organization as Kendall this evening. As Culver City is looking this EIR at energy and resiliency for its power, I'm just wondering, is the city considering uses for green hydrogen in the future, potentially as LA tries to become a hydrogen hub, the LA metropolitan area, I should say. And in general, how is the city going to be looking at energy and resiliency in this EIR?
Thank you for your comment. I don't know, Sol, if you would like to speak to the green energy, or perhaps Eric. Oh, Sol, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Sorry, everyone. Saul Blumenfeld, City of Culver City. The intent of our general plan update is to look at other forms of energy as potential ways for potential use in the city. And we're already modifying some of our codes, for example, our building codes, and have adopted REACH codes. And we're looking at adopting building electrification code over the next year. And the general plan would likely build on that work and include programs that are related to alternative forms of energy that promote sustainability and reduce global greenhouse gas. Right now, we're in the midst of preparing these various elements. I think maybe Eric might want to talk about the progress on those elements. But as things progress, we'll know more about the contents of those elements. Eric, do you want to add to that?
Sure, thanks all. We have included, and we're in the process of drafting the different elements of the general plan, as Saul said, and going through an internal review process with city staff. And those elements will come out as the public draft general plan later this year. We do have a chapter devoted to infrastructure, in which energy is one of the topics in that chapter, as well as a chapter on climate protection, which also talks about energy and energy efficiency and conservation in buildings. So we are addressing it in those particular areas of the plan itself. And I believe there was a follow-up question as well from James about how it was going to be incorporated into the EIR.
Sure, so I'll take on that portion. So in the EIR, we will have an energy section. There's also a utilities section, I believe, that will cover things like, I think one of the utilities questions is about whether, new infrastructure might result in an impact. And so that's something we'll need to take a look at. In the energy section, that's about energy efficiency, but also about renewable energy plans and policies. So to the extent that the general plan would have policies that would support these types of alternative energy facilities, that will be analyzed in the context of is that in line with regional and state goals for alternative energy. So we would look at both the infrastructure side and the renewable energy and energy efficiency side of it.
Thank you all for your input on that response. Are there any other questions from the public? Seeing no other hands raised, we'll just wait. Wait for any further comments, and we'll stay on the line.
And Jacqueline, this is Saul again. If it might be helpful once again to reiterate the process for receipt of written comments and then the deadlines for receipt of them.
Sure, let me go back to the previous slide. So the city is accepting written comments either via mail through the physical mailing address of the city, shown here on the slide, or through the Advance.Planning email address, Advance.Planning@culvercity.org. And the deadline for that is April 4th, sorry, at 5:30 p.m. And more information is also on the Picture Culver City website, both just for general plan 2045 information, as well as the CEQA piece.
So Jacqueline, we'll give it a few more minutes to see if anybody else wants to comment.
Sure. Patricia. I think you have another comment.
Yes, I use the time as long as there's not somebody else talking. Maybe I was not really clear in my question, but I can see that if you so I pose my question also in another way, is the phasing, the execution of the different elements of the general plan or the realization. If you would not combine things, it could be that you have done everything and you only did not update your energy infrastructure or your waste infrastructure for some stupid reason. You would, of course, never do that. And then later on, you will have to do that. And then you theoretically, you probably don't comply with the environmental wishes. How is phasing and trying to combine activities, is that part of, could that be a recommendation, a environmental impact mitigation recommendation?
Well, hi, Patricia, Saul here. I guess my question, I have a further question to your question. Are you thinking, is what you're asking about, you're not focusing on the interdependencies so much, I think, as Eric was pointing out, which is always a function of the general plan because it has to be internally consistent by state, under state law, and of course, just for common sense. But I think what you're asking about is, can one element supersede another element, in terms of importance? In other words, so that they're not all treated equally. Is that your question?
Well, or that the other way around. Let's say we want more housing to be built, but we are not able to implement a better active transportation, the measure. So we postpone making a good bicycle network, or we postpone putting the electricity or sewage infrastructure. And that, and then I would say you miss opportunities of becoming all at once much more sustainable. If you would have done that all together at a certain moment, if you would have said, well, for Jefferson Boulevard, we are going to make a shade tree canopy and put electricity under subsurface, and add when we are also adding higher buildings alongside and add the bike infrastructure there, something, all these things together, then you can then you make not a complete street, you make a complete part of the city. And that would be so much more helpful in your environmental impact. That
Right.
I thought that would be a good use of this AER moment to show these opportunities you have combined.
Well, this is Saul again. I'm going to make one comment, then I'm going to ask Eric and ESA to jump in as well. But you know, the general plan is intended to look at synergies among the elements and among the goals and policies and objectives and programs. That's basically the intent. And so I'm going to say that if we have a sustainability goal in mind, or we have in mind reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to want to see how alternative transportation and landscape planting and new energy efficiency in buildings work together and not just separately in order to maximize the outcome.
Yeah.
Now, Eric, do you want to comment on that further?
No, I think you did a good job of describing it. And one thing I would say, one addition would be, I think the general plan and then the environmental impact report studies the full build out, so the complement of the transportation system, the land use, parks and open space, and looks at its environmental impacts. And I think maybe you're trying to get at this question of like, well, if we have all this land use change and we do this housing, we do these jobs, what if we don't keep up with our infrastructure? What if we can't build it fast enough to service those? And so the environmental impact analysis will look at the needs and disclose the needs of the city in terms of the capacity changes that would be needed to meet the needs of those residents or those businesses in the future, so that you could build kind of, make sure that you build those things in tandem. And and I'm sure ESA can talk more specifically about this, but there will be policies and goals, policies and actions in the general plan, but there also might be mitigation measures in the environmental document that say projects need to do X, Y, and Z to ensure they meet the needs of those residents. And those can go across all of those different topics within the EIR itself. I think that's maybe what you're getting at, and there's a larger question about phasing and triggers in there too, and how those things move in tandem with one another. But I just maybe ask ESA if they want to speak a little bit more towards the EIR side of this as well.
So I'll just add in that, you know, your point to like your sort of example that you provided, if there's more housing, but there isn't the transportation some sort of transportation facility that was envisioned, if it's not there yet, then it wouldn't be able to reduce the VMT from this new housing, because it doesn't exist yet. But and that, in my head, is kind of getting towards this, the difference between a program assessment and then a project level assessment, right? These future projects that, when it comes time to build an actual new housing project, right? That's going to be evaluated at a project level. And if there isn't this supporting transportation infrastructure, it will need to take that into account. Maybe it's going to come a few years down the road or something, but it will need to look at sort of that existing condition for when that new project is proposed.
Alan, this is Saul again. Maybe you want to say a little bit about phasing and triggers, because that might get to some of Patricia's questions as well.
Well, let's see. I may actually need to rely on my colleague Jacqueline for some advice there. Um, Jacqueline, do you have any thoughts about that?
On phasing, what we, as part of the EIR, we will be analyzing all of these topics as they relate to the general plan and all of the elements within that. But we would need to look at what the methodology is for those to know exactly if there is going to be any sort of phasing involved. So that's something that we would be determining as part of the EIR process. I don't know if that.
Well, yeah. So for example, we have on as part of our mission under reaching RENA, the addition of a certain number of units within the current housing cycle, and thereafter we have some other targets that we're likely to encounter. And as we reach those increments of build out, there would likely have to be other corresponding improvements in transportation and some of the other elements that are found in the general plan. So the plan would have to anticipate these changes over the planning period. So and it needs to do that as best it can. Obviously, things get much fuzzier as you go further into the future. But I think as we look at that build out under RENA in this housing cycle over the next several years, and then maybe the cycle thereafter, that will tell us what other things we have to consider relative to infrastructure and transportation and so on. So, I think I don't have any more specifics, but that's typically what happens in an environmental document, where you have to look at things over time, and you have to try to plan the future. Plan the infrastructure around the future that you've envisioned. Hopefully that's helpful. I guess as we move forward with the documentation under the EIR, some of those issues will become much clearer.
So we don't have any further comments at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you. I guess then we'll move forward. We'll close the meeting. Jacqueline, do you have any final remarks?
No, just to reiterate that, ability to provide written comments is can be done through the physical mailing address to the city or to the city's advanced planning email address on this slide. And you have until April 4th, 2022 at 5:30 to do so.
Right. And we'll also post comments that we receive on the city's website.
Okay.
And we'll collect the comments as necessary, working with ESA to make sure that they're addressed. Okay, well, with that, I think if there are no other questions, we'll close the meeting. Thank you all for participating, and we'll look forward to the next meeting and to the further documentation in the EIR. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.